Sounds like it's time to go. So hey everybody, I'm Nate Case. We're here to talk about threat detection and remediation on AWS. I like to move. This is like the first time I've had like a really little thing to not go anywhere on. Feels a little funny. So I like to ask my audience questions as we're going. Feedback's great. Looking for Dave. Did Dave make it to the session today? Oh, there we are. Say, Dave. How are we doing, man? Good. So we're going to talk about threat detection and remediation. Really, this is auto remediation. Remediation would indicate that you're actually doing something. So we're going to talk about a lot of things today. We're going to try to stay in the detective controls area, right? We're going to talk about CloudTrail config, Amazon CloudWatch, GuardDuty, VPC Flow Logs. And at the end of the talk, when we start talking about some of the auto remediation stuff, we're going to get over to AWS Config rules and Lambda. So who's actually used AWS CloudTrail? Oh, that's what I like to see. Wonderful. So first things first. Humans and data don't mix. Why do we say that? Has anybody seen Stephen Schmidt speak? reInvent, our CISO? So he's got these really wonderful diatribes on why humans and data don't mix. But effectively, it boils down to the reality that your administrator, the person that you expect to be the one to stand up and make the right decision, is the one that's going to get phished. He's the one that's going to make a mistake. He's the one that's going to cause an issue. I do another talk in the Loft series occasionally that kind of goes into this a little bit more, but it boils down to the fact that when we talk about threat detection, we're talking about those outside threats, right? Things that come into your network from outside, it's obvious, yay. We've all done that for a long time, right? That's what we do, it's bread and butter. We talk about inside threats, right? So we've got the administrator that's no longer with us maybe, and is trying to grab all the data and run, right? But one of the threats that we don't often talk about is this threat where we're talking about the administrator that's coming in to do some work at 2 in the morning and he's really, really tired and he hits delete. So one of the things that I generally try to talk about here to keep the humans away from the data is as we go into this, let's think about it from the point of view as Administrator Bob, right? Administrator Bob means well, but the reality is he's going to do something he shouldn't do. So when we talk about threat detection, I want to use that as one of my baselines to detect. Because why? It's going to happen a lot more, frankly, than those outsider threats or really malicious insider threats. It's something that we can act on. It's something that we can test for. It gives us more opportunity to test and run through some of these sorts of scenarios. Does that make sense? We good with that? Cool. Anomaly detection. The other reason to keep humans away from the data. So as we use machine learning to do some of these threat detection scenarios, right? If we have humans in our data all the time, if we have humans in our VPCs, if we have humans doing things in production accounts all the time, how does a computer know which anomaly is an anomaly and which anomaly isn't? It's just somebody doing their job, right? So that doesn't really work out. So one of the things that is a best practice for us, one of the things that we talk to our clients about all the time, is keep humans out of your production data. Keep humans out of your production VPCs. Does that make sense? So we just talked about SSM a second ago with the last talk. I don't know if anybody was in here for that. But SSM is one of these great services that allows you as a client, as a user, to administrate your environments remotely. There's no human access there. You can do it from a command line. That's great. I would like you to push one step further and talk to you about DevSecOps pipelines and immutable infrastructure, so you don't have to worry about that. There's no human interaction in that actual production environment. When you need to make a change, you're doing a blue-green deployment and you're rolling over to the new environment. Okay? Any questions? No? And this is the goal. When something bad happens, we want to see it, right? I want to know that there's actually something going on. In the other talk that I do, we actually kind of spread this out for a few slides, but we're kind of going to be a little short on time here, so we're kind of making it quick. But it's really interesting. You see this stuff over on the left, and you think to yourself, oh, we've got an anomaly. Oh, my God. Well, not really. It's normal. It happens every Monday morning. The anomaly is the thing that we want to catch. This is the way we go ahead and we split the field. Well, we thin the field, we get rid of the noise, and we specify in production when we have somebody log in, when we have somebody type AWS space S3 space LS, we know, hey, that's a problem, right? That's something that we need to flag. Okay, so what's the biggest issue? Why are we concerned about threat detection? Why has it been so hard historically? So who has a data center? Yeah, that's kind of one of those things. So before this, I actually used to help work on data centers and build data centers. I used to build tier 4 data centers. Really familiar with it. I'm really familiar with threat detection in large data centers. Used to buy SANs, set up fiber channel, all sorts of crazy stuff because we had Splunk clusters that were just god-awful huge. Why? So we could do threat detection. So we could do remediation. It got to be a lot of work. It's expensive. It is. We start talking about signal-to-noise ratio. If you have a system, a data center that's just a bunch of different clients, if you have a number of clients in one big place, there's a lot of noise. Who's going where? Why are they there? Why all of a sudden do we have IP connections from a different country? And the cost. Like I said, fiber channel, SANs, it gets expensive. Humans, it gets expensive. So what is that, how is that fixed with AWS? We can spin up an entire cluster to deal with the threat that's coming in right now, and we can use different services that are currently in AWS that help us deal with those threats and find those threats without having to go through a Splunk cluster, without having to go through these huge clusters that used to sit on these SANs. Make sense? Cool? All right. So how are we going to do that? We're going to use CloudTrail. Who uses CloudTrail? You guys all said you see it. Who uses it? Who knows what it's for? Okay. So CloudTrail is going to tell us all sorts of stuff about specifically what? Which attack plane are we looking at here? The API. Very good, sir. Thank you. API gateway, API attack plane. So we're going to be looking at all of the things that happen on this API scenario. So we're going to look at who's logging in, right? We're going to look at who's changing MFA. Maybe we're going to look at who's turning on and off GuardDuty. Maybe we're going to look at some more interesting things about, hey, this user over here just logged in from a totally different country than they normally log in at, and they started making users. Uh-oh. Bad things, right? We want to know that. This is where we find it. We've got VPC Flow Logs, different attack plane, right? VPC Flow Logs look at the network infrastructure, right? We're looking at the TCP connections, the connections between two systems. So we're looking at ENI to ENI. We're looking at outside system to ENI. So now we've got these two things here, right? We've got one that's specifically looking at services and one that's looking at specifically network. Cool? We've got CloudWatch logs. Who uses CloudWatch logs? Not so many. See, that's an interesting thing to me. So CloudWatch logs is a really interesting system that a lot of people don't use. This is the type of thing where we can go ahead and start utilizing a service in Amazon that has the ability to connect to Lambda and do things in Lambda that will help you look at your, if you want to, your actual inside instance logs. So I can go ahead and route all of my Apache logs this way. I can route all of my secure logs this way. And I can start running Lambda and CloudWatch events on those logs. That's good. We like that. But this is an entirely different attack surface than the last two, isn't it? So which attack surface is this? We're kind of looking at our API maybe here, aren't we? We're looking at our OS. So Amazon GuardDuty, how does that fold into these first three logs? So Amazon GuardDuty does some really neat stuff. I think the most important word that we're going to talk about here is continuous. But it also has a fourth type of system that it looks at. It also looks at your VPC DNS. So now we're able to look at all of these attack surfaces, and we're able to start folding them together. Right? What can Amazon GuardDuty detect? So if we start utilizing these attack surfaces as threat detection, utilizing all of them together in a unified fashion, what do we get? Well, we get some really interesting stuff. Right? I'm going to know if somebody's trying to log into one of my systems. I'm going to know that that system is now making API calls that it didn't make before. That's good. We don't want systems in our infrastructure making random API calls or mutating API calls. That's bad. Right? Who knows what a mutating API call is? Oh, thank you. So let's talk about mutating API calls after the talk. Maybe we should look at who's going ahead and exfilling data. So what's one of the nastiest ways to exfil data? So we can go ahead and take a DNS packet, right? And I can go ahead and start making DNS requests to an outside system. And DNS is just DNS, right? Nobody cares about DNS. What happens when I start adding data to the back of that DNS packet? When I start exfilling my data via DNS, GuardDuty is going to catch it. Okay? So GuardDuty is a really great thing. It kind of uses all of these attack surfaces at the same time and finds correlations between them and helps us figure out what's next. So what else can we do? This is kind of our rabbit hole for the talk. Not going to say anything, Dave?
You define all the signatures, or do we have?
No, actually, the signatures for GuardDuty are both defined locally by you if you'd like to, or you can go, well, rather, let me restate. You can set up whitelist, blacklist, but the signatures actually come from threat intelligence. So we generally give those to you separately. Not really on the rabbit hole, though. That's OK. So in general, as we're talking about using AWS to detect things, what else can we detect? Go ahead.
Is it all signature-based or is it behavioral-based as well?
Say again?
Is it all signature-based or is it behavioral-based as well?
So it's both. That's an interesting question. I'm going to get to that here in a little bit, but if I don't, make sure you hit me at the end of the talk. As we go into this rabbit hole, we're going to start talking about what can we detect, what can't we detect. And the thing that I think we've kind of done a poor job of, frankly, talking about historically is the different attack surfaces that are out there. We've got infrastructure. We just talked about that, right? We're looking at our VPC Flow Logs. We're looking at maybe some of the logs that come off of those instances themselves. Pretty cool. We're looking at services. That's a different attack surface. Those are different things. We have to handle them differently. And as we start looking at our threats, we need to start handling that threat detection differently, too. So if we're looking at infrastructure, right, we're going to start looking at maybe some patterns. Maybe somebody's going ahead and doing a port scan. Maybe we're doing a probe, an SSH password probe, right? So we're having somebody just bang away at our server trying to get in. All of a sudden, however, that server stops getting banged on, and we start seeing it starting to probe other servers. Well, that's a problem. We can see that in the VPC Flow Logs. That makes sense. We can find that. Cool. But historically, people stop looking for this concept where the infrastructure actually washes into the service. So now I have an instance that has a profile, and that profile then maybe gives it extra abilities inside of AWS services. So maybe that instance starts making users. Maybe that instance starts spinning up other instances. We want to make sure that we limit things. And this is one of the things that we need to start thinking about as threat detection, as security geeks, frankly, personal. I love security, it's great. So as we get into this services concept, right, we want to start talking about how are we watching for these things? How do they correlate? GuardDuty is really a cool thing because it lets us start doing that. All right, so out of the rabbit hole. So as we go through this then, GuardDuty starts to handle, this is the time for your question, by the way, sir in the blue shirt. You want to ask the question again, and I'll go ahead and repeat it?
I was asking if it's just signature-based or if it's also behavioral-based.
So the question is GuardDuty signature-based or also behavioral-based? So when you turn GuardDuty on, can the machine learning portion of it begin to make suggestions for your system? Who knows about machine learning? Can that happen? Not really. Can't. If I'm going to have a computer learn what my normal is, right? If we go back to that third or fourth slide where we saw all of the kind of heartbeat-esque points, right? It has to learn what's normal for you. For it to learn what's normal for you, it has to be on for a while. So one of the things about GuardDuty that's frankly kind of awesome is that it's free for the first 30 days. Why is it free for the first 30 days? Because it's learning. It's figuring out what's going on in your environment, and we want you to be able to see what it's going to cost. Okay? Typically very, very low-cost service. As we get to the end of that 30-day cycle, however, those behavioral things start kicking off. I'm going to rabbit hole again. So I'm on one of the internal teams that deals with client issues that go beyond normal. So clients that have some events and whatnot. As we start talking about some of this, we had one of our guys go over to another country recently, and he had GuardDuty on his system. Cool. Well, he logged in from another country all of a sudden. The machine learning had been going for so long that it freaked out and said, why are you logging in from another place? That's not OK. So it was really cool to be able to see all of this stuff kind of start happening in a machine learning way. So good for your answer? Cool. Anybody else? All right. So detecting known threats. Totally threat intelligence, to Dave's question earlier. Right? We've got CloudStrike, we've got Proofpoint, good stuff. You can always bring in your own. if you'd like to. So if you have a subscription that you want to add here, you can. So this is kind of the thing that we do to begin with, right? These are the things that we call definitions. This is generally not machine learning. This is something that we're just going ahead and taking a look at, right? This is totally, this signature matches X, so consequently, we need to act. And for threat detection and auto remediation, this is really important. Cryptocurrency is a good one here, right? We know that cryptocurrency is a problem. If we're going to do cryptocurrency mining, it's going to go out to a cryptocurrency DNS source that other people know about. Great, let's go ahead and stop you cryptocurrency mining. Make sense? This is kind of how we go ahead and look for that. Generally, we have a number of these types of findings. Now, this is not all of the findings. This is a generalized category of findings. So when we get into some of the bits in a minute, the first demo actually, we're going to start talking about what can we do to unify some of these threats into runbooks. And as we make a runbook, the first thing we're going to have to do as security officers, as security people, we're going to have to start thinking about how do we want to group these things together? How do we want to remediate these things? What are the things we need to do? So as we look at a recon, who thinks a recon port scan or a probe is a big deal? Yeah, middle of the road normally, right? Everybody gets their stuff scanned. You put up a system on the internet, it's going to get scanned. It's life. Generally, I will tell you as a security guy, probably ought to re-architect if you're getting your stuff scanned, but one of those things that happens. However, if we start seeing spam bot or CNC activity, that's a big deal. So we're going to have one category that's dealing with some of these lower issue types of things, right? We're going to have another category entirely that's going to handle some of these more higher criticality things. And we're going to begin to auto-remediate on those specific categories very differently. If somebody's getting probed, are we going to burn that server and make another one? Probably not. Probably not what we need to do there. If we start seeing CNC activity coming out of one of our servers, are we going to burn that server and make a new one? Probably. If we start seeing malware, yeah, that's probably what's going to be the next step. All right, I'm running a little slow. So what does this look like? So this is a GuardDuty finding that has been sent out. So all of a sudden we have something related to specifically Bitcoin-related activity. You all see that? What do we do? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and fire off a Lambda, right? Makes sense. Cool. What are we firing? What are we looking at? So we can see the account number, we can see the region, we can see the instance ID, and we can see what happened. This would be in the last couple of slides a second ago where we saw all those groups. We need to decide, how do we want to respond to this? So in our runbook, we're going to say anything that falls under this high category, this would probably be one of those things, we're going to go ahead and burn that server, right? Cool. So we're going to start looking at how we're going to handle this response, and we're going to kick it off, and we're going to terminate the instance. Is this something that we can terminate? Probably it is. Probably it's in an ASG, an auto-scaling group, and we're just going to go ahead and make another one. Cool. Not a big deal. So now that we know that we've terminated it, we can stop the instance. In this case, we actually call out that it's false. We can't stop this instance. It's not stopped yet, but it can be soon. All right. So we go ahead and we kicked off the Lambda. We update. Yay. This is kind of the most important thing that happens here. So now that we've gone ahead and killed it, what does this say? SNS notification. What's an important part of remediation? If you're doing this by hand, if you're sitting at a computer and you start remediating your instance, what do you need to do? Notify. Communication is key, right? So if we're going to start remediating something in an account, in an instance, cool. If we do it without telling anybody else that we're doing it, not cool. Why? Because you're probably not the only person that found that issue. And if there's somebody else that's working on that same system or working on a similar problem, best that we all know what we're doing. So things that we learn here. Conditional logic is key, definitely. Do we want to look at all of the things the same way? No, we don't. If something gets probed and maybe we need to re-architect, maybe we need to put a load balancer in front of something, cool, absolutely. If something has something more serious, like Bitcoin mining or CNC activity, definitely we want to go ahead and take care of that in a different way. Cool? Good. There is no human intervention required. Did anything in the last demo require a human to do anything? No. There was no human intervention needed at all. The idea of this concept, seriously, is that you are the administrator, you are sound asleep at 2 in the morning, something bad happens, you don't care, you continue to sleep. I want to sleep. I'm sure you guys do too. So as we're talking about this, I want to get that report at 9 o'clock when I pull into my desk, right? And I want to say, oh, look, we had an instance that was kind of compromised last night, and this is what happened. And I've now got a forensics volume sitting over here that I need to go through this morning. It's a secondary issue. It's not something that's high priority necessarily. As we look at this, that means that the humans, the administrators in our organizations now don't have to get up at 2 in the morning. We don't have to necessarily have somebody focused on this. We're not losing a human for a full day because they were up until 4 in the morning dealing with this crazy thing. We have a human now that can go up this chain and start to look at, well, you know, realistically, we had this happen because we forgot to patch something, or we had this happen because we left a port open. That's an important thing to make sure that people understand. We're basically multiplying your force by using some of this automation. Key here is time to remediation is exceptionally reduced. Having done this manually a number of times, do you want to go grepping through logs to find stuff? I mean, I love grep, man. It's good stuff, but yeah. If I can just go ahead and automate the entire thing, grep to begin with, and tell the system, hey, when you see this happen, do this thing over here, that'd be great. All right, GuardDuty fun stuff. GuardDuty actually can go multi-account for us. So is this a one-account thing? No, we can actually deal with multiple accounts and deal with them from a centralized location. I'm going to try to make up some time here, folks. Sorry. Dealing with threat detection and triggers. So now that we've talked about GuardDuty, and GuardDuty is great, what else can we use? Has anybody used AWS Config, CloudWatch events? A little bit? Who loves AWS Config? I hear you, man. It is awesome. So AWS Config rules is really cool. This allows me to go ahead and look at my infrastructure and say, does it match what it's supposed to match or not? We're going to go ahead and say, hey, if this is my actual, this is my zero line, this is what my immutable architecture should look like, when something changes, I want to know, and I want the history of that change going back. So if I have somebody log in and start making changes to my system, adding users, adding IAM roles, adding you name it, I can start figuring out how that happened, why, and when. Now, again, DevSecOps pipeline totally shouldn't be happening. You should be automating the heck out of your production environment, but eventually something's going to happen where this is going to be key, right? We want to know what happened and why. This gives us the why and the who. Now, once we have this kicked off and we're running, you'll note here that we say AWS source GuardDuty, right? Okay, so if we ran this CloudWatch event, what would happen? Okay, let me ask this a different way. Got a bunch of funny looks. If I look specifically for an event that looks like this, what am I going to look for? I tell you I'd give you a box of Girl Scout cookies to the first person that raises their hand, but I'm out of Girl Scout cookies. So, right, I'm going to look for type. I'm going to look for cryptocurrency. Thank you, sir. Cool, absolutely. Do I want to look for GuardDuty? What's going to happen if I look for GuardDuty? All of them are going to go every time, right? That's not really what I want to happen. I don't want to have GuardDuty trigger a Lambda every time I have a finding on something getting probed. I don't want to have GuardDuty kick off a finding every time and have that kick off a Lambda function every time something's, it just ends up being too much Lambda running and it's noise, and we don't want noise. Jumping back forward. All right. So what can we then do with that? If we've limited our stuff, if we've limited our CloudWatch events filter to the point where we're getting only important things here, and this is one of those things where we have to go back to that runbook moment, and we as security professionals need to sit down and pick out what are the important events that I want to look at, go through CloudTrail, look at all of the different things that I can see in the API, pick out the API events specifically that are important to me, then I want to make notifications. I want to do auto remediations, right? At very least, I want to tell, hey, dude on call, we've got somebody logging in from a different country that they don't typically log in from. Go call Administrator Bob and make sure he really is in Europe somewhere today. All right. So how are we going to do this? Who uses Systems Manager now? Who uses Systems Manager? Well, thank you. So I was actually on the Systems Manager SME team for a while. Really good stuff. When it became its own service, and it's now I think it's ASM now. We launched it last year as its own product. It's been on the bottom left of EC2 menu for a long time. When we launched it as its own product and it kind of becomes its own thing, that's cool. And that allows us to start talking about it a little bit more. And when we start talking about this, it really gets to be important because all of a sudden, historically where we could use Lambda to kind of act on the instance, we're acting on the account. Maybe we have an account breach and we're going to go ahead and roll everybody's password and going to roll everybody's credential keys. Cool, absolutely. But if we use SSM, now we can actually get inside of that box, right? We can start doing some interesting things on instance. So as we roll this together, it's kind of a nice tool to have, isn't it? Especially as threat detection, talk about auto remediation and forensics. I can now do threat detection automatically. I can do my remediation automatically. And now I can even do my forensics automatically. So that's kind of cool. What do we get out of that? Much reduced time. So how is this going to look? Yay, demo. So we've got GuardDuty. Yay. It's going to go ahead and say, hey, we've got a problem. We have a port that's open. We have an incident that's occurring that hasn't occurred before. My machine learning is going to say, hey, Bob has now logged in from, I don't know, take your pick. What's a good country? Romania. Bob has logged in from Romania. Poor Bob. Actually, it's a nice place. But he doesn't typically do that. Typically, he's sitting in Boston. Just for you. And then we're going to go ahead and fire off a Lambda function. What's this Lambda function going to do? It's going to go ahead and look at what is Bob doing, right? Bob is currently on an instance. And Bob has added an elastic network adapter, an ENI, to this instance. Is that normal? Generally, no. The system does also have data, so that's important. So what exactly has Bob done? Well, we've got a normal elastic load balancer with, ENI, elastic network interface, with a normal security group on it. Great. And I'm doing this all through Bato 3. This is all happening in Lambda in Python, right? So I'm just starting to go down through this system and look at the different descriptions of things happening. And as we get to the elastic load balance or elastic network interfaces, we're going to see that the first one, yep, absolutely, it's got data SG on it. Good things. 80 and 443. So we're talking web and HTTPS. The other one, however, is 3389.0.0.0.0. Is that normal? Should Bob have done that to our production systems? No! No, please don't do that. Okay, so what do? We can burn that, right? We can take that away. Is that happy? Is that helpful? Yes. Is that really what we ought to do? Probably we ought to look at this a little bit more and figure out what's going on, right? So Bob opened that up to the world. That's kind of a big deal. What happened to that instance? So now I can actually use SSM to go through and do different things on that instance that historically I couldn't do. Maybe I'm going to grab the logs. Maybe I'm going to do top. Maybe I'm going to do PS-EF. I want to see what the things that are going on that instance right now. I want to see all the functional things, the processes that are running. Cool. Might do a PCAP. Who PCAPs their instances? Anybody do forensics with a network capture? Yeah. So typically that means you log onto the box, doesn't it? And you got to do your own little PCAP, or you're doing a switch port mirroring, right? So now I can do all of that via SSM and nobody woke up. I can do a memory dump. I can do lime or margarita shotgun. And I can put all of that out of forensics volume. So after it all goes to the forensics volume, what happens? Well, we're going to go ahead and drop that forensics volume over to another account because we have to keep it safe. We don't want other people to play with that forensics volume, not a good thing. And then we're going to burn the instance. Gone. Hard to do when you were in a data center before. People got really frustrated when you started lighting servers on fire. It's not a good thing. But we can go ahead and make an EBS snapshot of that. And that's important, right? We want to know what that system actually had on it. So this all comes into my desk, and I'm now sitting there at 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning, and I've got a stack of stuff that I need to do today. But I didn't have to get up at 2 in the morning. All right. So I think this is pretty cool. I really like the fact that we can do Lambda and have Lambda kick off a lot of this other stuff. It's good. As we start talking about this, we start looking at Systems Manager being able to remediate those threats very, very quickly. We start being able to do that forensic stuff on server. One of the things that I'd like to point out here is that this is all possible only if you do the pre-work before it actually happens, right? So as a guy that does incident response on a semi-daily basis, please, 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 talk to your account owners, talk to your SAs. Make sure they run you through the well-architected review. Make sure that they go through the pre-work on incident response with you. Because if you get to an incident and you haven't done any of that pre-work, this whole presentation is great, but it's not going to help you very much, because we actually have to do the pre-work prior to that incident occurring. Cool? All right. Some threat remediation partners, and a different slide configuration. That's interesting. Always fun to have solutions over top of other things. Good folks, please definitely work with them. Worked with many of them, love them. A couple of open source things that you can look at. Margarita Shotgun isn't on here, but I know the guys over there, really good guys. And that's it. So we have about 20 minutes left. The intention was to have you guys be able to ask some questions. So ask away. Anything that I've talked about that you want to know about or have questions on how to do? Oh, come on, Dave. When does it all get to GovCloud? Actually, all of this is in GovCloud now. I didn't say WAF. Yes, ma'am.
Does the PCAP capture, does it do any retroactive capture? Like?
It does not do retroactive capture. You would have to know that that was happening to capture that data. So one of the things that the PCAP will not give you is the signature of the attack prior to the event actually being triggered. There are ways that we can sit down and talk about that if you want to architect that for your system.
Are there best practices to follow for building your baseline in GuardDuty?
Say again, I'm sorry.
Are there best practices to follow for building your baseline in GuardDuty, like a specific?
So what I will tell you is that when you activate GuardDuty, right, it's going to go ahead and do all of the machine learning initially. So what I want you to do is not activate GuardDuty until you're ready to make that a production account. So like right now, we're actually spinning up a really intricate multi-account setting for one of our clients. And we're doing everything via API and specific users. So we're going to do all of that now, and I'm going to activate GuardDuty as kind of that last thing I'm going to do, because I don't want GuardDuty to learn that it's normal to have people logging into this account, because that's not something that I want it to know.
Is there a way to blow away your baseline?
There is not currently a way to blow away your baseline. Would be nice. No.
So once it's dumb, it's always dumb.
No, once it is, to repeat the question, once it's dumb, it's always dumb. No, it is not. So it will learn over time what a normal is, and if that happened for a little bit, you're just going to have a longer learning period. Sir?
Yep. You had mentioned that all this is in GovCloud currently.
Actually, that's an interesting question. I have to check on that.
Okay. Well, the reason why
I was being flippant with Dave. I
no, I
apologize.
say because I know GuardDuty's not. We're an impact
Yeah,
level
fair
4
enough.
system, so GuardDuty's not available.
GuardDuty is not in GovCloud yet. You are correct, and neither is WAF.
That's what he likes to do. He gets us all excited.
That's an interesting question. Next question.
Is there a way to ingest went through the lateral logs, VPC Flow Logs,
Yes.
query logs? Is there a way to ingest that to a third party?
Is there a way to ingest that third party?
Like either ingest it into Splunk?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Totally, definitely, absolutely. Lots of people go ahead and take that into Splunk and Sumo Logic. You can totally put it into S3. You can add Kinesis connectors and actually, stream it into either of those products. So good stuff.
After the 30 days, what is the charge?
So it's dependent on you and your infrastructure. It's generally very, very, very low. I would suggest that I think there's only been 1 or 2 times I've seen it be more than 5%. So it's generally very, very cheap. The intent was to make it a very cheap, very, very low-cost product.
Question in the back.
The voice of the Almighty back there? All right.
The Almighty. How do you build resilience into this architecture from false positives from the machine learning?
One more time, sir. A little louder.
How do you build resilience into this architecture,
Okay.
given false positives that come out of the machine learning inevitably?
How do I build resilience into this architecture without giving false positives from the
Well,
arch?
I mean, so GuardDuty is going to generate some false positives sometimes, right? And so how do you build the resilience kind of downstream from that to make sure you're not, blowing away a lot of things that are actually things that you don't
Oh,
want
I
to?
got it. So how do we deal with the fact that if we're doing auto remediation, how do I not blow away something in an ASG if we think it's a false positive?
Correct.
So the intent would be that we build our architecture so I don't care. Honestly, like you should be architecting to the point where you could go ahead and spin down, destroy, burn a server, and it's not a big deal. I would rather have a false positive and react on it than not have a false positive. Or frankly, not have a positive. That's really what it comes down to. I want to be able to react to that more quickly. And that's the architectural plan there. It's fair. It does take more effort.
So for that as well, there's also the danger of a false positive cycle, where
Yes.
you blowing up a machine causes another machine to react oddly.
That is
and
true. Yeah.
So
How do we
there
plan
are-
for that?
yeah,
And that's something that we need to sit down with you and go through a well-architected review and make sure that that doesn't happen. And to be very clear, when we start talking about auto remediation, when we start talking about auto remediation, I want to be very clear about that. That's something that you totally need to plan, and it's something that you need to make sure works well. If you have an issue where you have one machine going away and consequently another machine goes away, if we look at like an ASG group, an ASG for instance, where we have the rules in that ASG making sure that things are normalized, we need to make sure that we've balanced those two things correctly. But that's really more of an architectural question that shouldn't, if you've arranged it correctly, shouldn't be an issue.
yeah, and acting funnily yourself and making it fall over while you're awake
Decidedly,
is a better way of discovering that you've introduced a
yeah,
cycle or something.
that's decidedly true. If anybody's seen the Simian Army stuff from Netflix, Simian Army, good stuff. It's a good way to start breaking stuff in your environment prior to going production to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, break it yourself.
Yeah,
Instead of
definitely break it
waiting.
yourself. Sir?
What does GuardDuty determine the severity levels of its findings?
How does GuardDuty determine the severity level of its findings? The findings right now are, well, yeah, they are. If you look at the JSON, they've actually got numbers on them too, though. Those are set by your GuardDuty team right now. Anybody else? We've got 14 minutes. Oh, there we go. Yep. I think these slides are available to you as well. They're hyperlinked, so you can just click on them and not have to worry about it. Sir?
Is there a way to set that threshold for that 30 days of learning beyond that?
No, there is not currently a way to change the threshold.
So if you're doing like quarterly or annually type of behaviors or, parsing data or whatever, or rolling data over, and that stuff happens quarterly, biannually, that type of thing, how do we account for that?
So the question going back to GuardDuty doing machine learning and doing kind of cycles, what happens when we have a quarterly, biannual, annual scenario where we're doing something very intense in that block of time? You're going to get a GuardDuty finding. And that's one of those things that we need to make sure that you've planned for. That's, as we architect the system, as we go through that well-architected review, that's something that we need to make sure we understand. You can start and stop GuardDuty, you can. Generally, I will tell you that's something that I actually want to auto-remediate to turn it back on. But that said, it's decidedly something, if that, through your well-architected review, is what you need to do for that annual process, that's what you need to do. It is a one-click off and one-click on scenario. Sir?
If you have an instance where you know a workload is going to be geographically limited to, say, the United States,
Yep.
what's the most direct way to just block all traffic? I mean, obviously there's going to be proxies and things,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
what's the most direct way without having to go through machine learning to say, I don't want traffic from anywhere but the U.S. to hit this workload?
So there are ways that we can do some of that. The IPs are really generally not what I want to point you to, but that will probably be where we end. Anybody else? We've got 12 minutes. Yes, you can suspend GuardDuty. It is actually an API function. You can suspend it for X, and then it will suspend. Generally speaking, though, that's something that I told the nice lady over here. Probably I want an auto remediation on that, so when somebody does suspend it, it kicks back on, so you need to make sure you disable that auto remediation as well. Go ahead, sir. Sorry.
Yeah, how do you, if you want to automate your FedRAMP baseline controls with layer controls, in addition to that, those baseline controls, how would you adjust those controls into that data stream that you showed in that slide?
Okay. If I want to adjust my baseline control.
Baseline FedRAMP controls.
Right.
And then you want to add a layer on top of that with additional controls.
Mm-hmm.
How would you take the composite of all those controls and
Put it over here.
GuardDuty and make sure you're compliant with those controls?
Oh, wow. That's like not an easy question and not something I can answer quickly. I would tell you that I would probably use AWS Config to validate that those controls are happening. There are a couple of third-party products like Exacta365 that I would probably call on to make sure that those controls were actually being followed. But it would be multiple packages, and it would have to be done very carefully.
So if you want to ensure like FTP is not being used or somebody attempts to use it,
Mm-hmm.
you'd have to code that into the guard correctly?
So FTP, you're not supposed to be using it. And after so many attempts, maybe we'll want to lock down that specific IP, put it on a blacklist, some such. If we wanted to do something like that, that would be totally an auto remediation. I would actually probably put that in the VPC Flow Log auto remediation bucket in the network architecture. But realistically, that's going to be something where I'm writing something more custom. That's actually not an AWS config sort of a thing. That's more of an infrastructure remediation question. It's probably not going to get, well, depending on how it happens, it may not actually get caught in GuardDuty either. So that's one of those things where we need to talk about what the actual reality of that situation is. But it's doable. Sir?
On the right side, you had notifications to Slack and Jira.
Yeah.
And PagerDuty. Was the one to Jira, was that ticket creation, and is that two-way so that GuardDuty has the ticket number?
Yeah. Well, GuardDuty is not going to get the ticket number. To be clear, GuardDuty is the thing generating the finding. It is not the Archer system or the SIM system that's going to start to deal with that.
So it's not once it creates that issue in Jira,
It's not going to validate or follow that Jira, right? This is more so that in the morning when you get in at 9, you have a Jira ticket waiting for you that you know you have to deal with. And to be fair, it's API driven, so these are the 3 that are here, but I could pretty much put it into anything you want. Yes, sir? Oh, come on, you raised your hand.
I was asking if you're in this direction, is there any active product that can integrate with Query or that XML that would be needed for that capacity, other than just telling you it's okay?
So GuardDuty isn't going to be the thing that does that. You're going to basically build your own Lambda system, and that Lambda system is going to potentially take that server offline, or SSM is going to go ahead and take an image, figure out what's going on inside of that instance, and then go ahead and maybe it's going to kick off an image of that that EBS volume, or it's going to go ahead and do a packet capture. It's going to do Margarita shotgun to get the memory. Sir?
Is GuardDuty specific to an attack or to an actual, can you have it look at specific VPCs?
So it's an entire account. So it's not specific VPCs. It's going to look at everything. So best practice would be that your production account is just that, and you have an app in that production account, and it's a single app. We can talk about that later if you want. Sir?
You had mentioned the other gentleman that each user is responsible for their Lambda functions for shutting stuff down and whatnot.
Yeah.
Are there collections?
There are. There are some really nice repos if you look on the Amazon code repos. So, yeah. Henrik Johansson, I think, is the one responsible for that. Really great guy. Ma'am?
Question about GuardDuty. It's doing all this wonderful stuff. It's like
Continuous monitoring, yeah.
looking at all the data, looking at anomalies. That's very sensitive information. How is that stored and protected for each client?
Okay. So GuardDuty is looking at all of this stuff that might be sensitive. How do we split that up between clients. GuardDuty runs outside your VPC. So it is not currently FedRAMPed. That's important for you to know. It is something, however, in the way that they deal with that data, it ends up being more fingerprinted, so the data that you would have considered sensitive is gone by the time it would leave your account, effectively. It's not something that will maintain beyond an existence, and you'd need to sit down with the GuardDuty team and go through that probably, if you want a deep technical understanding of exactly what's going on there. Say again, ma'am?
Our government customers have a lot of questions about.
And they do, yeah. Saw somebody in the back. Yep.
So after the initial 30 days of baselining, you said that it's continually learning. Is there like a sliding window? Is there a time decay? How does that work? Like an event a month ago down the road, is that weighted the same as an event that just happened?
So there is actually a sliding window. I do not know offhandedly what the sliding window timeline is, though. As I understand it, we're working on where that needs to be long term. We got 6 minutes. Anybody else? Oh, yes.
Yeah, you mentioned that a lot of it is DNS. Is that only Amazon provided DNS?
That is VPC DNS. So it is the DNS being utilized inside that VPC.
So inside of VPC, you have your choice of
Yes.
rolling your own DNS server.
Yes, you do.
Will it use either one?
It will use the Amazon provided right now. Okay. Can you review your baseline? No, you cannot review your baseline. If you go look at the actual pane for GuardDuty, it's relatively simplified. You can see the findings that it's coming up with, and it will tell you low, medium, or high, and you can do some filtering on that. But realistically, it's not intended to be a SIM. The intent is that you take that and then go through either Lambda, CloudWatch events, go to SIM of your favorite choice, Splunk, Sumo Logic, what have you. Yes. So that's an interesting question. Is there anything here that would tell us that GuardDuty should take action on an on-prem instance? Since SSM can function on-prem and in the cloud, it is an option. So I can come up with a scenario where we have an instance being probed by another IP, and maybe my Lambda goes ahead and looks at that, and it says, hey, look, this IP is actually in our data center. Then yeah, I'm going to go ahead and fire this SSM off to the data center, and I'm going to make that instance go ahead and begin remediation. I could see that definitely, yeah.
Is GuardDuty completely unsupervised, or can you provide training points for it?
Is GuardDuty unsupervised?
The machine learning element.
Well, it's only 2, so staying home alone seems like a bad choice. All joking aside, it is unsupervised. There is no way for you to deal with what it's doing when. You can begin to ignore, and that's kind of where we talked about some of the filtering in CloudWatch events. You want to filter those events appropriately so that you only act on the events that you feel are important. That kind of goes back to the runbook discussion where you have low, medium, and high kind of scenarios for yourself. For instance, if you are a Bitcoin miner and you're using Amazon to mine Bitcoins, GuardDuty is going to find a lot of Bitcoin mining findings for you, right? I mean, that's going to happen. But if that's what you do for a living, that's probably not, that's a finding you're going to want to ignore.
Thank you.
Sir, again, you're getting to be a friend, man.
Is it based on things that on the roadmap?
I couldn't answer that even if it was. Anybody else? All right. We have 3 minutes. Probably the next guy's getting ready to speak. So thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoyed it.